My wife called me at 2:17 a.m. while I was parked outside a truck stop in Oklahoma. Her voice was shaking so badly, I barely recognized it. "Daniel, there's a man in our house." I sat up instantly. My heart started pounding. Then she whispered something that didn't make sense. "He just walked in, like he lives here." My name is Daniel Harper, and that night still plays in my mind like it happened yesterday. I was parked outside a truck stop in Oklahoma, halfway through a long-haul run from Arizona to Tennessee. The engine was off, the cab was quiet, and I was trying to get a few hours of sleep before hitting the road again. Then my phone rang. It was 2:17 a.m. When I saw Sarah's name on the screen, I immediately knew something was wrong, because she never called me that late, unless it was serious. I picked up fast, expecting maybe an emergency with Ethan or some household issue. But the moment I heard her voice, everything changed. She wasn't just worried. She was terrified. Her breathing was uneven, and she was whispering like she was afraid someone might hear her even through the phone. She said there was a man in our house. At first, my brain didn't even process the words properly. I thought maybe she meant a repair guy, or maybe a neighbor had come over unexpectedly. But then she repeated it again, slower this time, like she needed me to understand the weight of it. A man was inside our home in Dallas, Texas, and he was acting like he belonged there. That sentence hit me in a way I can't fully explain. It didn't sound like a break-in. It sounded familiar, like he knew the space, like he had permission to be there. I sat up straight in my seat, my hand gripping the phone tighter. I asked her immediately if she had called the police, and she said yes, they were on the way. But what she said next made my stomach drop. She told me he knew the door code. That detail changed everything in an instant. This wasn't some random intruder breaking in through a window or forcing a door. This was someone who had access, someone who had been inside before or had been given access by someone we trusted. That realization hit harder than the fear itself. I started asking questions rapidly, trying to understand what was happening. Who was he? What did he look like? Was he aggressive? But Sarah couldn't give me clear answers. She said he was calm, almost too calm, like he wasn't surprised to be there. He was walking around the house like he knew where things were kept. That detail made my chest tighten even more. I kept trying to stay logical, telling myself maybe there was a simple explanation, maybe a friend of a friend, maybe some misunderstanding. But deep down, something felt deeply wrong. The most disturbing part came when she said he claimed he had been staying there. Not breaking in, not visiting, but staying. Like the house was part of his life. That statement didn't just confuse me. It shook me at a deeper level because it implied time, familiarity, and routine. My mind immediately started racing through possibilities. None of them good. I thought about security codes. I thought about who had access to our home. I thought about whether something had been happening behind my back without me knowing. At that moment, I wasn't just a truck driver sitting in a cab anymore. I was a husband trying to protect a family from hundreds of miles away, completely helpless. The road ahead of me suddenly didn't matter. The delivery schedule didn't matter. All I could think about was my wife standing inside our house with a stranger who somehow knew things he should never have known. My name is Daniel Harper, and before that night, everything in my life felt simple, even if it was exhausting. I was a long-haul truck driver based out of Dallas, Texas, and I had been doing that job for years. My life was measured in highways, rest stops, fuel receipts, and delivery deadlines. I spent about 18 days a month on the road. Sometimes more when routes got extended or schedules shifted. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it paid the bills, kept a roof over our heads, and gave my wife Sarah and our son Ethan stability. That was always my justification whenever the loneliness hit me on empty stretches of highway in states like New Mexico or Nebraska. Our home was in a quiet suburban area outside Dallas. Nothing fancy. Just a modest two-bedroom house with a small yard and a driveway that always seemed too empty when I was away. Sarah stayed home with Ethan. She handled everything there: school runs, groceries, repairs, daily routines, everything that I couldn't be there for. I used to admire her for it. She made the house feel alive, even when I was gone for weeks. Whenever I came back from a run, tired and worn out, she would greet me at the door with a hug that felt real. Ethan would run up and show me something new he had learned or built. Those moments used to make the entire job worth it. But looking back now, I realize how much I relied on appearances. I trusted what I saw during short visits home. I never really questioned what life looked like when I was gone. I assumed things stayed the same, that Sarah managed everything just like she said she did, and that Ethan was growing up in a stable environment. I believed I was doing the right thing by working long hours and sacrificing time at home. In my mind, I was being responsible, a provider doing what a father and husband should do. The truth is, I lived in two different worlds that never fully connected. On the road, I was isolated, focused on driving, schedules, and survival. At home, I tried to switch into family mode for short bursts of time before leaving again. That constant cycle made it easy to ignore small inconsistencies. When Sarah would delay replying to messages, I told myself she was busy. When video calls became shorter, I assumed it was just routine stress. When conversations felt slightly distant sometimes, I blamed fatigue on both sides. I also didn't fully understand how long my absences felt from their perspective. To me, 18 days was just part of a work cycle. To them, it was nearly 3 weeks of daily life without me physically present. Birthdays, school events, small emotional moments, all happened without me there. I thought technology could bridge that gap, but it never really did. A phone call or video chat can't replace presence, and I didn't fully realize that at the time. There were also financial pressures that I didn't talk about much. Truck driving is steady work, but it comes with its own instability. Delays, maintenance costs, and unpredictable schedules. I often took extra routes or longer hauls just to make sure we stayed ahead. I told myself I was doing it for my family, and in a way I was, but I didn't see how that constant absence shaped the household I was trying to support. Sarah handled everything on her own most of the time, and I assumed she was fine because she never complained openly. I thought silence meant stability. I thought routine meant security. I thought as long as I kept sending money home and coming back regularly, things would stay intact. I didn't see the emotional distance building slowly underneath the surface, or how easily a life can shift when one person is always physically absent while the other is carrying everything alone. The call that night didn't feel like a normal emergency. It felt like something had already been building long before I became aware of it. When Sarah first told me there was a man in our house, my instinct was fear, but almost immediately that fear started mixing with confusion. Nothing about the situation fit a simple explanation. It wasn't just the presence of a stranger. It was the way she described him, calm, familiar, and disturbingly comfortable inside a place that should have been completely private to our family. That's when the situation shifted from panic to something heavier, something that felt like a hidden reality surfacing. As I sat in my truck outside that Oklahoma rest stop, my mind began racing through possibilities. I tried to stay logical. Maybe it was a contractor. Maybe a neighbor had mistaken the house. Maybe Sarah was overwhelmed and misreading the situation under stress. But every new detail she added pulled me further away from those simple explanations. The most unsettling part was the door code. That wasn't something random. That wasn't something a stranger could guess or force their way into. That was access that required trust, communication, or familiarity with our household. When I asked her directly who the man was, her answers were unclear. She didn't sound like someone describing an intruder. She sounded like someone trying to process something that didn't make emotional sense to her either. That's when she told me he was acting like he belonged there. That phrase stayed in my mind because it carried a level of familiarity that didn't belong in a situation like this. People don't act comfortable in someone else's home unless they believe they have a right to be there. That thought alone made everything feel unstable. I started thinking about how long this could have been going on without my knowledge. My absence from home wasn't new. I had been on the road for years, spending long stretches away from Dallas, trusting that everything was being handled properly at home. In my mind, absence meant distance, but not disruption. I assumed life continued in a predictable way even when I wasn't there. But now, hearing Sarah describe this situation, I started realizing how much of life I had been physically removed from. The conversation kept circling back to one detail that refused to leave my thoughts. The man said he had been staying there, not visiting, not breaking in, but staying. That statement introduced a completely different layer to the situation. It implied routine, familiarity, and time. It suggested that whatever was happening wasn't a single incident, but something that may have been developing gradually without my awareness. At that point, I began questioning everything. Not just the current situation, but the small things from the past that I had ignored or explained away. Late replies that I assumed were normal. Shorter conversations that I thought were due to stress. Changes in tone that I dismissed as fatigue. When you're constantly on the road, you normalize distance, and that normalization can blind you to subtle shifts in behavior or communication. The more Sarah spoke, the more I felt like I was trying to assemble a picture with missing pieces. She wasn't giving me clear answers, but not because she was hiding something obvious. It felt more like she was overwhelmed, trying to explain something she herself didn't fully understand yet. That uncertainty made it harder for me to rely on instinct or assumption. In the middle of all this confusion, one thing became clear in my mind. Whatever was happening in that house wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. It had structure, familiarity, and time behind it. And I was sitting hundreds of miles away, trying to understand a reality that might have been unfolding right under my nose, while I believed everything was normal. By the time I hung up that call, I wasn't thinking like someone just hearing bad news. I was reacting like someone whose entire reality had started to crack in real time. I didn't even remember how I got the truck back on the road. One moment I was sitting in silence at a rest stop in Oklahoma, and the next I was driving again, heading straight toward Dallas with no real plan, except getting home as fast as humanly possible. The road that night felt different. Normally, long drives are predictable for me. You settle into a rhythm. You think about deliveries, fuel stops, sleep schedules. But now every mile felt heavier. The highway signs passed by, but I wasn't processing them properly. My mind kept replaying Sarah's voice, especially the way she said, "He knew the door code." That one detail refused to leave my head. It kept looping like a warning I couldn't shut off. I tried calling her again, but she wasn't picking up. That silence made everything worse. When you're far away and something goes wrong at home, silence becomes its own kind of answer. It fills in gaps with possibilities you don't want to imagine. I started thinking about Ethan, about whether he was safe, about what kind of situation Sarah was actually in at that moment. The distance between me and my home suddenly felt unbearable. As I drove through Texas, fatigue and adrenaline started mixing in a strange way. I wasn't tired enough to sleep, but I wasn't fully alert either. I kept switching between anger, fear, and confusion. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual, almost as if holding it harder would somehow speed up time. Every truck stop I passed felt like an obstacle instead of a rest option. Stopping didn't feel possible. I needed answers, not rest. During those hours, my thoughts started turning inward. I began questioning my own choices, not just the situation itself. I thought about how many years I had spent on the road, believing I was doing the right thing for my family. I thought about the sacrifices I made, the birthdays I missed, the nights I wasn't there for Ethan. At the time, I told myself it was all necessary. But now, in that moment of uncertainty, those same sacrifices started feeling like gaps in something I had failed to protect. The emotional weight wasn't just about fear of an intruder anymore. It became something deeper, a sense that I had been absent long enough for something in my life to change without me noticing. That realization didn't come as a single thought. It built slowly, mile after mile, until it became impossible to ignore. At one point during the drive, I pulled over briefly at a gas station near the Texas border. I remember standing outside the truck for a few minutes, just trying to steady myself. The night air was cold, but it didn't clear my head. I checked my phone again, still no response. I almost considered calling the police myself, but I didn't even know what to report. A man in my house, a situation I didn't fully understand. Everything felt too unclear to act on properly, yet too serious to ignore. I got back in the truck and kept driving. The closer I got to Dallas, the more intense everything became. The road signs started feeling personal, like they were counting down to something I wasn't ready to face. I wasn't just returning home anymore. I was returning to a situation that had already unfolded without me, and I had no idea what version of my life I was about to walk into when I finally arrived. When I finally reached Dallas, it didn't feel like coming home. It felt like arriving at the end of something I didn't fully understand yet. I had been driving for hours with barely any rest, and my body was exhausted, but my mind was still running on pure tension. Every mile closer to the house made my chest feel heavier, like I was approaching a truth I had been avoiding for too long. The neighborhood looked the same when I pulled in. Quiet streets, familiar houses, the small details of a place I used to feel safe in. But something about it felt off that night. Maybe it was just me carrying too much in my head. Or maybe it was the fact that I knew something inside that house had already changed before I even opened the door. I parked my truck a little farther than usual and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to prepare myself for whatever I was about to see. When I finally stepped out, the air felt strangely still. No sounds from inside the house, no movement, nothing that suggested urgency anymore. That silence confused me more than anything Sarah had said on the phone. Emergencies are usually loud in some way. Sirens, shouting, chaos. But this was different. This was quiet in a way that felt controlled, almost settled. Like something had already happened and was now just waiting to be acknowledged. As I walked toward the front door, I noticed small things without meaning to. The porch light was on. The door was closed properly. Everything looked normal from the outside. That normality created a strange disconnect in my mind because it didn't match what I was expecting. I kept replaying Sarah's voice in my head, but the house in front of me didn't reflect panic or intrusion. It looked like a place where life was continuing, not breaking apart. I knocked once. No answer immediately, I waited a few seconds, then knocked again, harder this time. My mind was already preparing for the worst kind of scenarios. But then the door opened slowly, and Sarah stood there. Her face changed the moment she saw me. It wasn't relief exactly. It was something more complicated. Exhaustion, fear, and something close to guilt all mixed together. Before I could even ask a question, I realized Ethan wasn't there. That detail hit me instantly. I asked where he was, and she said he was at her sister's house. Her voice was low, careful, like she was trying not to trigger something. That immediately told me this situation wasn't over. It had just shifted locations. I stepped inside the house, and that's when I saw it. A man's jacket hanging near the entrance. Not mine. Not something I recognized. Just there, casually placed, like it belonged. That small detail did something to me emotionally that I didn't expect. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it confirmed that what I had been fearing wasn't just a misunderstanding. Sarah didn't say anything for a moment. She just stood there, watching me process everything. I asked her directly to explain. My voice was calmer than I expected, but inside I was barely holding everything together. She sat down slowly, like her body couldn't support her anymore. What she started saying wasn't clear or organized. It wasn't a confession or a clear explanation. It was fragmented, like she was trying to make sense of something while speaking. She said he had been helping. With bills, with Ethan, with things around the house while I was gone. That sentence hit me in a way I didn't expect, because it wasn't about intrusion anymore. It was about replacement. Not physical replacement in a violent sense, but in a quiet, gradual way that had apparently developed over time, without me realizing it. I stood there trying to process how something like that could happen without me knowing. How a presence could grow inside my home to the point where it was normal enough to be called help. That was the moment I started realizing this wasn't just about a stranger in the house anymore. It was about how far my life had shifted while I was away, without me ever being present to see it happening.